Hello, you have now reached the last concept which you will be learning as a part of this introduction course, and that is exception handling. So why is exception handling so important? You might have come across the situation where you were using an app and that app abruptly closed and you had no idea why. The reason that closed was because some kind of an execution went wrong and that was not handled properly. Now, being a good programmer, you wouldn't want to do that. You would want to handle those exceptions. And that's when exception handling comes into picture. A simple example what I can give you is the divide by zero exception. Now, if you are writing a program that performs some mathematical operations and there is a division that is happening, and if the user divides any number by zero, that program would terminate without letting the user know what happened. Division by zero is an invalid division, and that's an exception which needs to be handled. So let's go ahead and see how to perform an exception handling in Python. Let's get started by opening Python's idle environment. So what is an exception? Say for example, you divide a number by zero. Now division by zero is an invalid division, and that raises an exception. Now, being a good programmer, you would not want to raise such exceptions to your user. You need to make sure that exceptions like these are being handled. Python provides try and except blocks in which we can handle such exceptions. And how do they work? The block of code which you feel might cause a problem needs to go into your try block, and the exceptions that are being caught needs to go into your except block. Let's see how that works. So I have my try block in which I will have my block of code. Say for example, I have two variables, length as 10 and my width as 0. Now let me make a division of length by width, which is 10 by 0, and it will raise an exception. So that needs to be handled in my except block. So how to define an except block? You enter the keyword except along with the exception. Now, the word exception, or rather the class exception, handles all of your exceptions. Now, we will be looking at how this can be a problem shortly. Let's see what happens now. So, I'll go ahead and print division by 0 is invalid. Kindly change your input. Right. Now let's see what happens on the execution of this try block. There. Now this output is much more neat than my previous output. It says the user that division by 0 is invalid, kindly change your input, than to have all those exception statements which is raised by Python. Now let's see how this exception can be a problem. Say, for example, I haven't declared my variable width, so let me go ahead and delete my variable width. Now if I try to access my variable width, it raises an exception. Now if we go by the previous try block which we had, which is to try and then divide my length by width and then raise the same exception. Let me just copy and paste this since the exception is the same. So what happens in this case is the same exception is being raised, which is division by 0 is invalid, kindly change your input. Now this is a wrong exception. The reason an exception was raised is because the variable width was not defined. It was used before it was defined, but the prompt which you're giving to the user says that division by 0 is invalid, kindly change your input. So how do we handle such cases? You need to handle such exceptions by giving the name of the exception. Now if you don't know what the name of the exception is, take a look at the exception that was thrown by Python. Can you see this name error here? That's the name of the exception. So instead of using a generic term exception, use this name of the exception. Now let's see how that works. So in my try block, I have length divided by width, and in my except block, I give the name of the exception, which is name error. And within this, I print the statement, variable has been used before defining it. Now let's see what happens. There. Now that message is much more better than the previous one, which misguided the user. This one clearly says the variable has been used before defining it. Now in case you wanted to use the divide by zero exception, you can take a look at what that exception was. It was a zero division error. Now one try block can have multiple exception statements. Let's take the same example. But this time, I will be changing the value of my width. So let me reassign the value of width to 0. And then what I do will be to raise an exception for my zero division error. Let me copy paste it. So this is the name of the exception which I'm trying to catch. So as you can see, under one try statement, I'm having multiple except statements. Let's give a print statement in this which says division by 0 is invalid. Kindly change your input. Now on execution of this try block, it clearly raises this exception which says division by 0 is invalid. Kindly change your input. So that's the end of this lecture. You learned what is exception handling and you learned about the try and except statements in Python. You looked at some of the except statements in Python as well. So that brings an end to this section and to our learning of this course. In the next section, we will be implementing a project based on all the learnings that we have so far had. I'm really excited to put into practical use of all the knowledge that we have gained so far, and I'll see you there. Thank you.